while communist forces had been stopped and Seoul liberated once again on March 17th, the risk of South Korea's collapse greatly diminished by April 1951. But both Truman and MacArthur were increasingly at loggerheads with one another on how to continue the war. MacArthur wanted to take a much more aggressive stance against the communists, but Truman was unwilling to unleash MacArthur. Frustrated, the famed general began openly criticizing Truman's administration and even his own superiors, something which flew in the face of the American practice of keeping the military and politics as separate as possible. He was especially critical of the restriction of bombing to North Korea. Having specified targets inside China, he would have wanted to expand the air campaign to include. Thus, Truman felt he had no choice but to relieve MacArthur of his command on April 11, 1951. The decision was met by criticism at home by a largely adoring public, but an inquiry into the move confirmed the president had such powers. And over time, as information about MacArthur's conduct came out, public opinion became more divided. He was replaced by Lieutenant General Matthew Ridgway, fresh from his recent offensive against the PVA, which had seen the 8th Army strike back across the 38th. Within weeks, the first test of the new UN commander came, when vastly outnumbered UN forces found themselves having to stand in the way of yet another Chinese advance on Seoul, as part of their spring offensive at the battles of Kapyong and Imjin River. 2 British Commonwealth battalions, the 2nd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry Regiment, and the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, successfully rebuffed an entire Chinese division at Kapyong, while 4,000 men of the British 29th Brigade succeeded in delaying nearly 30,000 troops of the PVA 63rd Army at the Imjin River, although sustaining heavy casualties in the progress. As spring gave way to summer, the fluid nature that had defined the war thus far ground down significantly. Both sides found themselves unable to break the brutal stalemate, save for during smaller, relatively minor skirmishes, which they were unable to capitalize on elsewhere. Given this position, both sides agreed to begin peace talks in July 1951, but notions of a ceasefire were rejected. Thus, as envoys from both sides agreed to meet in Kaesong, North Korea, to attempt to reach a negotiated settlement, US and UN forces prepared for the autumn offensive, which they hoped would add weight to the UN negotiating team. Beginning August 31st, the offensive led by the 8th Army, now under the command of General James Van Fleet, with 1st Corps in the west and 10th Corps in the Central Eastern sector, both comprising 5 UN divisions attacking north, hoping to take enough North Korean territory so as to force the communists to start seeking a peaceful solution beneficial to Rhee's government. In the 1st Corps sector, the South Korean 1st Division and the British Commonwealth Division made notable advances beyond the Imjin Valley, while other US and South Korean divisions advanced past Chorwon, but then stalled in heavy fighting. Not wanting a repeat of the reversals of the previous year, Kim Il-sung had issued orders that his remaining armies were to stand their ground at all costs, and that anyone who retreated would be executed for treason. 10th Corps, meanwhile, found themselves fighting some of the better equipped and more experienced Chinese units. And in the mountainous terrain, the US fighting men would bestow names upon their designated arenas that would go down in legend: Bloody Ridge, the Punch Bowl, and of course, Heartbreak Ridge. Despite dislodging the communist lines for several miles at one point, threatening North Korea's capital city, Pyongyang, the offensive failed to gain any real traction that could be translated to the peace table, which since October had been moved to the village of Panmunjombe for security reasons. On the contrary, the Chinese and North Koreans viewed their defense as successful, despite taking over 100,000 casualties, compared to 60,000 among UN troops. As winter brought an end to major operations, the negotiations turned to the issue of prisoners of war. Unfortunately, these talks produced a great deal of bad blood between the negotiators. Both sides had large numbers of troops who had gone missing in action, presumed to have been captured. But as they exchanged names of those they had in custody, it quickly became clear that the discrepancies were enormous. South Korea, for example, was trying to locate some 88,000 missing troops, but the North Koreans produced just 7,142 names, leading to accusations of murder and starvation in North Korean POW camps. Poor bookkeeping on the part of the South Koreans and the UN also produced highly inflated claims of how many Chinese and North Korean POWs they had in their custody, only for these to then be corrected. But this also led to North Korean suspicion that their troops were being killed whilst in captivity. As talks for prisoner exchanges stalled, the North Koreans, who now desperately needed every soldier they could get their hands on, sent agents to be captured and then infiltrate the POW camps, where they would organize the prisoners to stir up trouble. The idea being to make their captors actually want to give them back. This plan worked almost too well, as very soon, beginning on December 1951, full revolts broke out at several camps, which saw pitched battles take place between the prisoners and their UN guards. These revolts would continue well into 1952 and would be put down using tanks and gas against mostly unarmed prisoners, which provided the communists with a propaganda coup. Away from the front line, US troops were also still contending with a communist insurgency in the south, fueled by members of the KPA, who elected to remain behind as the UN pushed their main army back. And the heavy-handed tactics often employed by Rhee's army and security forces in clamping down on them saw numerous civilians caught in the crossfire, unintentionally or not. In February 1951, South Korean troops of the 11th Division massacred 705 and 719 civilians during the Sancheong-Hamgyong and Gocheong massacres, respectively. Those killed were branded communist sympathizers and included children and the elderly. Such killings bred resentment for Rhee's government and aided communist recruitment.